The letter was certified. My name was spelled correctly on the envelope, the same name I had signed to 31 documents over 6 years so that my son-in-law could build something that was never going to include me. I want you to hold that for a moment. Not the letter. My name. The one I had been signing to bank documents since before my daughter was old enough to have a husband. The one I spent 31 years making mean something. I was a bank teller for most of my adult life. The last 9 years, I was a branch supervisor. I knew what a co-signature meant. I knew what liability meant. I knew what it meant when a lender put your name on a document, that you were not a gesture of goodwill, you were a guarantee. You were the last person standing if everything else fell apart. My daughter Claire came to me in 2018 with a small business loan application. $18,000. Her husband Marcus had one truck and a plan. She said, "Mom, it's just to get him started. Your name comes off in 2 years." I believed her. I signed. 2 years passed. My name did not come off. There was a second document. Then a third. By the time I understood what I had been agreeing to, my name was attached to $340,000 in combined business debt, loans, leases, liability agreements, and every time I asked Claire when it would end, she told me soon. That Tuesday afternoon, I was at the grocery store when my neighbor Ruth called. She said a man with a clipboard had been at my door twice. I drove home. The certified letter was in the mailbox. I opened it at my kitchen table. I read the first page. Then I read it again. My son-in-law had filed a petition to have me declared legally incompetent. I set the letter down. I did not cry. I had spent 31 years managing other people's money with more care than most people manage their own. And I thought, he has no idea what I've been quietly preparing for. The petition was 12 pages long. I counted them. I don't know why I counted them. Maybe because counting things is what I do when I need to stay calm. 31 years of balancing ledgers will do that to you. You reach for numbers when the words stop making sense. The phrase appeared on the first page. Diminished capacity. I read it, and then I read it again, the way you read something when your brain refuses to accept that the words mean what they mean. Diminished capacity. My capacity. The same capacity that had supervised a branch of 42 employees, that had caught a $12,000 reconciliation error no one else found, that had managed my own finances without a single overdraft since 1979. I kept reading. Attached to the petition was a letter from a physician. A doctor I had never seen. A doctor I had not chosen, had not visited, and whose name I did not recognize. His letter described a woman who struggled with complex financial decisions, who showed signs of confusion when presented with multi-part documents, who, in his professional opinion, required a guardian to manage her affairs. I read that description 3 times. I was trying to figure out who he was talking about. I set the letter down on the kitchen table next to my coffee cup and I sat very still for a moment. Marcus had filed this. My son-in-law. The man whose first loan I had co-signed 6 years ago with a pen I still have in the drawer by the phone. The man whose company existed, in part, because my name had been on 31 documents that said, "If this fails, come to me." He had gone to a court and told them I could not be trusted with my own money. I want you to understand what that means legally, because I understood it immediately. If a competency ruling goes through, you lose the right to manage your own finances. You cannot open accounts. You cannot close them. You cannot make decisions about your own assets without a court-appointed guardian's approval. You become, in the eyes of the law, someone whose judgment cannot be relied upon. And if your judgment cannot be relied upon, Then anything you might say about documents you signed, any testimony you might give about what you were told, what you were promised, what you agreed to, carries very little weight. He wasn't trying to protect me. He was trying to silence me. I picked up my phone and called Claire. It rang 4 times and went to voicemail. I set the phone down. I looked at the petition again. 12 pages. My name spelled correctly on every one. I called Ruth. Ruth Okafor has lived next door to me for 19 years. Before she retired, she spent 23 years as a paralegal. She is not a woman who panics, and she is not a woman who softens things to spare your feelings. When I told her what the petition said, she was quiet for a moment, and then she said, "Dorothy, how much time do we have before the secondary hearing?" I looked at the filing date. I looked at the calendar on my wall. 11 days. Ruth said, "Call Gary." I had met Gary Whitfield 4 months earlier, at Ruth's suggestion. She had been pushing me toward an attorney for almost a year, quietly, persistently, in the way Ruth does everything. I had resisted longer than I should have. Not because I didn't think something was wrong, but because I kept hoping Claire would see it herself. I kept thinking, she's my daughter. She'll notice. She'll say something. Gary answered on the second ring. I read him the first page of the petition over the phone. I read him the physician's name. I heard him typing. Then he said something I did not expect. He said, "Dorothy, this is actually good news." I asked him what he meant. He said, "He just showed us exactly what he's afraid of." I didn't say anything for a moment. I was looking out the kitchen window at the yard I have maintained for 32 years, at the garden beds I put in this summer after my husband passed, at the fence Marcus had offered to repair 2 years ago and never did. Gary told me to come to his office the next morning. He told me not to call Claire again that night. He told me to sleep, if I could. I called Claire one more time before I went to bed. She answered. She said Marcus had to do something because I had been asking too many questions about the business. I asked her to say that again. She said, "Mom, you've been calling and asking about the leases, and he felt like you were becoming, he just needed to get ahead of it." I said, "He filed a legal petition claiming I have diminished capacity." She didn't say anything. I said, "Claire." She said, "I know. I know what he filed." I said goodnight. I hung up. I sat at the kitchen table for a long time after that. She knew. She had known before the letter reached my mailbox, and she had not called me. That night I went to my filing cabinet, the gray one in the spare bedroom that I have kept organized since 1991, and I pulled out a folder. Not the business documents. A different folder. One I had started 4 months ago, the same week I first called Gary, because something in me had understood, even then, that this was where we were heading. Inside that folder was a copy of an email I had found while looking through old messages Claire had forwarded to me over the years. She had forwarded it by accident, I think, or maybe she had forgotten I could read a full email thread. It was from 2022. I had written to Claire asking whether my name could finally be removed from the commercial leases. Her response to me had been warm, patient, the usual, "Soon, Mom, we're working on it." But before she replied to me, she had forwarded my email to Marcus. Her note to him read, "She's asking again. Just ignore it for now." I had been asking for 2 years. My daughter had been telling her husband to ignore me. I closed the folder. I put it back in the cabinet. I turned off the light in the spare bedroom and stood in the hallway for a moment in the dark. And that was the moment, not when I read the petition, not when Claire told me she knew, that was the moment I understood that no one in that marriage was going to do the right thing unless I made it impossible for them to do anything else. I had 11 days. And Marcus had no idea what was in that filing cabinet. I had 11 days. And I had spent 31 years learning exactly what that kind of deadline means. When you work at a bank long enough, you understand that money is not really about money. It is about position. It is about who has the legal standing to make a decision and who does not. Marcus understood that too, which is why the petition was not designed to hurt me. It was designed to erase me. A woman declared legally incompetent cannot manage her own accounts. She cannot close them. She cannot transfer funds. She cannot, in the eyes of a court, speak with authority about documents she personally signed. She becomes a name on paper with no voice attached to it. That was what he needed. Not my money. My silence. I sat at the kitchen table for a long time after I closed that folder. The house was quiet the way houses get quiet when something has shifted inside them. I did not turn on the television. I did not make another cup of coffee. I just sat there and let myself think clearly, the way I had trained myself to think for 3 decades when a number did not add up and I needed to find where the error was. The error, I had finally located, was trust. Not naivety. Not weakness. Trust, which is a different thing entirely. I had trusted Claire because she was my daughter and because I had spent 43 years believing that the people you raise will, at some point, choose you. I had trusted that the first document would lead to the last. I had trusted that soon, Mom meant something. It had meant, not yet. And then, not ever. And then, finally, in an email she forgot I could read, just ignore it for now. I thought about that note for a long time. I thought about Claire sitting at her kitchen table, a table I had helped her move into that house, a house I had co-signed the mortgage on in 2019, which I had not mentioned to Gary yet but intended to, typing those 6 words to her husband. She was not angry when she wrote them. That was the part one kept returning to. There was no guilt in those words, no hesitation. It was administrative. Her mother was a problem to be managed, and managing me meant keeping me quiet until the next time I asked. I had been asking for 2 years. I had been quiet for 6. I was done being quiet. The next morning I called Gary before 8 o'clock. He answered on the second ring, which told me he had already seen the petition. I had sent him a photograph of every page the night before. He said, "Dorothy, before you say anything, I want you to know that this filing is actually useful to us." I said, "You told me that yesterday." He said, "I know. I'm saying it again because I need you to hear it as a legal fact and not as something I'm telling you to make you feel better. This petition shows us exactly what Marcus is afraid of. A man who is not worried about witnesses does not file to have his mother-in-law declared incompetent. He files this because you know something and he knows you know it." I said, "I know 31 documents worth of something." Gary said, "Exactly. And now we have 11 days. He told me what I already understood, that in our state, an asset freeze in a competency proceeding requires a secondary hearing. That secondary hearing was scheduled for 11 days from the date the petition was filed. If I moved before that date, the accounts were mine to move. After that date, the court would have the authority to hold them pending the outcome. I told Gary about the 3 accounts. There was a pause on the line. Not a long one. Gary is not a man who pauses long, but long enough that I knew he had not expected it. He said, "How much, total?" I said, $214,000. Another pause. Then, "When did you open these?" I said, "The savings account in 1994. The certificate of deposit ladder starting in 2001, I had been rolling it over every 18 months since then. The money market account the year I made branch supervisor, which was 2007. He said, and Marcus has no knowledge of these accounts. I said, Marcus has never had any reason to know about them. They existed before he did. They were never connected to the business. They were never mentioned in any document I signed for him, because they were mine before he was anything. Gary said, Dorothy, I need you to go to that bank today. Not tomorrow. Today. Take someone with you. I said, I already know who I'm taking. Ruth had been ready since the morning I first called Gary. She had been the one who pushed me to call him, gently, persistently, the way she does everything, because Ruth spent 22 years as a paralegal and she recognized what was happening before I let myself name it. She had seen the process server from her front window. She had called me while I was still in the grocery store parking lot, still holding a bag of oranges, still thinking the worst thing that could happen that Tuesday was that I had forgotten to buy coffee. She was at my door by 9:30 with her coat already on. The drive to the bank took 12 minutes. I had made that drive for 31 years, 5 days a week, in every season. I knew every light, every turn, the exact moment the road curved and you could see the parking lot. Ruth did not talk much on the way there, which was what I needed. She looked out the window and let me drive. I did not go to the manager's office. I went to the window, because I knew the tellers who were still working there, and because I did not want a conversation in a closed room. I wanted to do this the way I had always done my work, at the counter, in the open, with nothing to hide. I closed the savings account. I broke the CD ladder. There is a penalty for early withdrawal, and I did not care, because the penalty was smaller than what I stood to lose if I waited. I transferred the money market balance. I opened 2 new accounts at a credit union across town, a place Marcus had never walked into, a place where his name meant nothing and mine meant everything it was supposed to mean. I was back in the car in 40 minutes. Ruth asked me how I felt. I thought about it honestly before I answered. I said, not triumphant. Not angry. Quiet. The way it feels when you finally do the thing you should have done 2 years ago and the only thing left is to see it through. She nodded. She understood that kind of quiet. That evening, Gary filed the counter petition. I did not know until the following week what his investigator had found about the physician whose report Marcus had attached to the competency filing, the doctor I had never chosen, never visited, whose name I had not recognized on page 1. It turned out that this physician had seen me once. For 11 minutes. At Marcus's request. The report he submitted to the court contained 3 factual errors about my medical history, a medication I had never taken, a diagnosis that belonged to someone else, and a date of examination that did not match the date on his own office calendar. Gary called me with this information on a Thursday morning. He read me the discrepancies one by one, slowly, the way you read a balance sheet when you want someone to understand every line. When he finished, I said, so the report is fabricated. He said, the report is inconsistent with verifiable records in ways that will be very difficult for Marcus's attorney to explain at a preliminary hearing. I said, that is what I said. Gary said, yes. That is what you said. I hung up the phone and stood in my kitchen for a moment. Outside the window, the yard was the same yard it had always been, the same oak tree, the same fence line, the same light in the late afternoon that I had watched change through every season for 18 years in this house. Nothing about it looked different. But I was standing in it differently. I was standing in it as a woman who had stopped waiting for someone else to tell her what she was allowed to do. Claire had called once, 2 days after I moved the accounts. I had let it go to voicemail. Her message was 40 seconds long. She said Marcus had to do what he did because things were getting complicated. She said she hoped I understood. She said she loved me. She did not say she was sorry. She did not say she had tried to stop him. She did not say she had not known. I listened to that message 3 times. Then I saved it to a folder in my phone, the same way I had saved everything else, because I had learned, 31 years ago, at a counter in a bank, handling other people's money with more care than most people handle their own, that you keep everything. You keep it organized. You keep it dated. And you never, ever assume that the person smiling at you across the table has read the same document you have. Gary's preliminary hearing was scheduled for 6 weeks out. I had 11 days behind me now, and 6 weeks ahead. And somewhere in a filing cabinet in my spare bedroom, in a folder I had started the same week I first called Gary, was a copy of a mortgage document from 2019 that no one had thought to ask me about yet. Marcus thought he knew the full shape of what I owned. He had never once asked about the house. I had listened to Claire's voicemail 3 times. Not because I needed to hear it again. I understood it the first time. I listened 3 times because I was looking for something, a crack in the words, a hesitation, a single syllable that suggested she had not known what Marcus was doing when he was doing it. I did not find one. She said he had to do what he did. Present tense obligation. Not past mistake. Not regret. Had to, as if a man filing a legal petition to strip his mother-in-law of her financial rights was simply a thing that needed to happen, the way you need to change a tire or replace a fuse. I saved the message to the same folder where I kept everything else. Dated. Organized. The way I had kept things for 31 years. And then I sat with what I now knew completely. Not suspected. Not feared. Knew. I had found the email 3 days before the voicemail. It was in my own files, a printout I had made in 2022 when Claire forwarded it to me by mistake, then immediately sent a follow-up saying to disregard. It was nothing, she had hit the wrong button. I had kept it anyway, the way you keep a receipt for something you hope you'll never need to return. Claire had forwarded my question to Marcus. My question about whether my name could finally come off the leases. And her note to him, 4 words above my forwarded message, read, * she's asking again. Just ignore it for now, *. 4 words. 2 years of asking, and my daughter had been managing me the same way you manage a slow drain. Not urgent enough to fix. Just something to work around. I had been patient. I had been reasonable. I had given her every opportunity to tell me the truth, and she had chosen, every single time, to protect the man she had married over the woman who had co-signed his first loan with nothing but her name and her trust in her daughter's judgment. That was the moment I stopped calling it a misunderstanding. There are things you can forgive because they come from weakness. Fear. Confusion. The desperate arithmetic of a marriage that isn't working the way you hoped. I understood all of those things. I had lived long enough to understand them. But this was not weakness. This was a decision. Made repeatedly. Over 2 years. By a woman who knew exactly what she was doing and chose to do it anyway. The dilemma I had been carrying for months, whether to confront Claire directly, whether to give her one more chance to come to me on her own, whether the damage to our relationship was worth whatever financial protection I might gain, that dilemma dissolved the moment I read those 4 words. Because the question was no longer should I protect myself from Marcus. The question was whether I was willing to keep absorbing the cost of a relationship that had already decided, quietly and without my input, what my role was going to be. I called Gary that evening. I told him about the email. I told him I had the printout, dated, with the original headers intact. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Dorothy, I need you to understand something. What you just described is not a side detail. That email establishes that Claire was aware of your requests and actively participated in suppressing them. It changes the character of the competency petition. It suggests coordination. I already knew that. I had known it since I read the 4 words. But hearing Gary say it out loud made it real in a different way. Not more painful. Just more precise. The way a diagnosis is not worse than the symptoms, it's just the moment you stop guessing and start knowing what you're dealing with. Gary told me the secondary hearing, the one that could have frozen my accounts, was still 11 days away. The 3 accounts were already moved. That part was done. What remained was the counter-petition, the physician's report, and the question of what Marcus's attorney would argue when they realized Dorothy Callahan was not the woman they had described in 12 pages of legal filings. They built their case on a version of you that doesn't exist, Gary said. I know, I told him. They're going to find that out. I went to bed that night in the house I had watched change through 18 seasons. The same walls. The same window light in the morning. But I had stopped being the woman in that house who was waiting for someone to correct a mistake that was never going to be corrected voluntarily. Somewhere in my spare bedroom, in a filing cabinet I had organized the same week I first called Gary, was a folder I had not mentioned to anyone. Not to Gary. Not to Ruth. Not to Claire. Inside it was a mortgage document from 2019. A property Marcus had never once asked me about, because he had assumed, the way people who underestimate you always assume, that he already knew everything there was to know. He had seen the accounts. He had seen the co-signatures. He had built an entire legal strategy around a picture of my finances that he believed was complete. He had never asked about the house. And tomorrow morning, I was going to show Gary the folder. Gary filed the counter-petition that same night. I didn't watch him do it. I was already home, in the kitchen, making the same cup of tea I had made every evening for 30 years. The kettle. The mug. The small ritual that had survived everything else. The competency petition was dismissed 6 weeks later at the preliminary hearing. I want to tell you what that room looked like, because I think it matters. It was smaller than I expected. Fluorescent lights. A long table. Marcus's attorney was a younger man in a gray suit who had clearly read a file about me but had never once spoken to me. He referred to me, in his opening remarks, as the petitioned party. Not Dorothy. Not Mrs. Callahan. The petitioned party. The physician's report was excluded before lunch. Gary had requested the doctor's full records. What he found was this: the physician had seen me once, for 11 minutes, at Marcus's request. The appointment was logged as a wellness consultation. The report he submitted to the court contained 3 factual errors about my medical history, including a medication I had never taken and a diagnosis that belonged to someone else entirely. The judge did not need to hear more. Marcus sat at the far end of the table. He did not look at me. Claire was there. She sat on the other side of the room, in a chair near the back. I saw her when I walked in. She was wearing the blue coat she had owned since her daughter was born. She had her hands folded in her lap the same way she used to fold them in church when she was small and trying to look older than she was. We did not make eye contact. I had thought about that moment for 6 weeks. What I would feel when I saw her. Whether I would want to say something. Whether she would come to me first. She didn't. Neither did I. The petition was dismissed. The hearing adjourned. I walked out into the parking lot with Gary on my left and Ruth on my right, and the February air was cold in the specific way that makes you feel awake, and I stood there for a moment and did not say anything. Ruth said, "You okay?" I said, "Yes." And I meant it. 2 months after the hearing, 2 of the 3 commercial leases I had co-signed were renegotiated. When I formally withdrew my consent and Gary notified the lenders, they re-evaluated the terms. Marcus lost the properties. The company was restructured. My name came off the debt. Not because Marcus agreed to it. Because the legal ground he had tried to build on turned out to be sand. The house, the one in the folder Gary had never seen until that morning after the hearing, is a small property 40 minutes from where I used to live. 3 bedrooms. A yard that needs work. My name has been on the deed since 1987, the year I made branch supervisor and decided, quietly and without telling anyone, that I would always have something that was only mine. I moved in on a Saturday in March. Ruth helped me carry boxes. We didn't talk much. We didn't need to. I put the kettle on the stove. I found the mug. I stood at the kitchen window and looked at a yard I had never once shown to Marcus, and I thought about the version of me he had described in 12 pages of legal filings. The woman with diminished capacity. The woman who could not be trusted with her own finances. The woman who needed to be managed. 31 years behind a bank window. 9 years as a branch supervisor. 3 accounts he never knew existed. 1 attorney retained 4 months before he filed a single page. That was the woman he had underestimated. Claire knows this address. I gave it to Ruth, and Ruth gave it to Claire, because I decided that was enough. I was not going to disappear. I was also not going to chase. She has not called. I don't know if she's waiting for me to reach out first. I don't know if she believes, somewhere, that what Marcus did was justified, that I had been asking too many questions, as she told me on the phone, as though a woman's questions about her own name on a legal document were a problem to be managed rather than a right to be honored. I don't know if she's ashamed. I don't know if she misses me. I don't know if she's still in that marriage, or whether the year has changed something between them that she hasn't told anyone yet. What I know is this: I am in a house where every room is mine. The filing cabinet in the spare bedroom is organized the same way it has always been organized. The folder with the mortgage document is still there, because I keep things. I always have. The kettle is the same one. The mug is the same one. The window light in the morning is different, it comes from the east here, not the north, and some days that still surprises me, and I stand there for a moment before I remember where I am. And then I remember. And it's fine. I've thought about what I would say to a woman who is sitting somewhere right now, reading a document she doesn't fully understand, being told by someone she loves that it's just paperwork, that her name will come off, that things will stabilize soon. I don't think I would say anything dramatic. I wouldn't tell her to fight. I wouldn't tell her to leave. I would just ask her one question. Whose name is on it? Because that name is not just a signature. It's a history. It's 31 years of knowing what a co-signature means. It's a savings account from 1994 and a CD ladder you've been rolling over since 2001 and a house deed from 1987 that no one else has ever seen. It's you. And the question I keep coming back to, the one I don't have a clean answer for, is this. If Claire had called me the morning after the petition was filed, before the hearing, before any of it, if she had said, "Mom, I didn't know he was going to do this," would it have changed anything? Or had too many emails already been forwarded, too many requests already been ignored, too many mornings already passed where she chose to say nothing? I think you know what I believe. But I wonder what you would have done.